Well, good morning. How are we all on this wonderful Sabbath day? All right. I've got a lot of work to do. Okay. Apparently you guys read the title of the sermon, thought we're just going to be quiet and still. And no, Be Still is the title of the sermon. And no, this is not a parenting sermon about what we usually say to our children about 9,000 times a day is be still, just sit there, be still. How many of you parents have ever said that to your children? How many of your parents ever said it to your adult children? All right. So, if you turn to Psalms 46, speaking of being still, Psalms 46 and verse 10. Psalms 46 and verse 10, it says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth." Be still and know that I am God. I know we all have situations in our life that we're all going through various levels. Sometimes we think we can't make it through, and then 6 months later we look back and go, wow, that was easy stuff compared to what I'm going through right now. It just seems like every moment of every day is a struggle, and we fight and fuss around. But we need to realize who we serve, who our God is, what He can do for us. And I understand that even in the struggle, it hurts. It's no good. And it's hard to stop and say, okay, God, you've got this. However, that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. We're going to look at Mark 4. Mark 4. We're going to look at the story of Jesus. All right, Mark 4. To start, as you guys are turning there, I'll read a little bit from Desire of Ages. It says, "It had been an eventful day." So before we get into the story, this is kind of up front what happened before this. It said, "It had been an eventful day for Jesus. Beside the Sea of Galilee, He had spoken His parables by familiar illustrations, again explaining to the people the nature of His kingdom and the manner in which it was to be established. He had likened His own work to that of the sower, the development of His kingdom, the growth of the mustard seed, and the effect of leaven in the measure of meal. The great final separation of righteous and wicked He had pictured in the parables of the wheat and the tares and the fishing net. The exceeding preciousness of truth He taught had been illustrated by the hidden treasure in the pearl of a great price. While the parable of the householder He taught His disciples that they were to labor in His representation." So He had a long day of teaching, and before that He had a lot of healing, and people were bringing them, and He was healing them. So just kind of picture that. He's had a busy day, He's worked all day, and now He is ready for a little break. And it's amazing to see that this is God incarnate, but He still is human. He still gets tired. He still is like, you know what? I just need to be alone. I need to be away from the crowd. Right? He needs some personal time, as we would call it today. But, so in Mark 4, starting in verse 35. So He gets in a boat. He says, let's go out to someplace else that's a little less secluded, or a little more secluded. So it's quiet. I need a break. So it says, that day, when evening came, He said to His disciples, "Let us go over to the other side," leaving the crowd behind. They took Him along just as He was in the boat. There were also other boats with Him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so they were nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke Him and said to Him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Be quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." So they get on this boat to go out, and this big storm came. And I read that because of the way this lake is, there's a lot of airflow and currents with the air, and that causes a lot of big storms all of a sudden. But a lot of times I look at this and say, how long did they struggle before they asked Jesus to come help? But what I also didn't realize, for whatever reason, is some of the disciples were fishermen. They did this for a living. So this wasn't the first storm they had to deal with. So for them, they're like, oh, it's just a storm. We got this. We know what to do. Batten down the hatches, all that stuff. So they fought and they fought. But then the waves came up over it. And it looked like everything was, it said, nearly swamped, nearly capsized. The boat was filling up with water, which I'm not a boater, but I know that water in the boat is not as wonderful as water outside the boat. So they were getting scared and furious, and they didn't know what to do. And then, maybe there was a flash of lightning, and they looked up, and there was Jesus sleeping and not moving, not being disturbed. So they had this all turmoil coming. They didn't know what to do. So then they turned to Jesus. And this reminds me, if some of you know, we have been here for about 10 years now, a little over 10 years. My first year here, there was a few accidents because you guys were introduced to Joey, who is very clumsy and accident prone. Praise God that has at least changed for a little bit. So when we first came down here, I separated my shoulder, so it was out, and it still was hurting today. So at work, where I used to work at Kraft Foods, there was a door to the restroom, and it was a big wooden door, heavy, had a glass in the middle. Well, normally, I would push where you're supposed to push with your right arm. Well, this shoulder was all messed up and in pain, so I couldn't really push very hard. So I'd use my left hand, which was no big deal because I did it a lot of times, and pressing the glass, and that's how we opened the door because it was big, thick glass and no worries. But this one day in December, as I was walking in, I pushed that door, and the glass gave way, and it shattered. Which would be like, oh, wow, that's not cool. But I went forward into the shattering glass. And one of it, I've got some cuts up here, but one of them sliced my forehead. And as I stepped into the bathroom, and there was glass everywhere, it looked like a crime scene. Because somebody was having arterial bleeding. If any of you know what that is, I won't explain it for those who are squeamish. But there was blood everywhere, and it was mine. So at this moment in time, I was in the middle of a storm and didn't know what to do. And it was just all over, and it was like, oh, I think I remember saying in all of Joey's-ness, oh, this is not good. That's what I said. So there was there. I didn't know what to do. I went to the sink as I'm holding my head. I looked up, moved my hand, and thought, yeah, this is really, really not good. So, fear and, the adrenaline started pumping. What am I going to do? So I can almost relate to these disciples who were on this boat, who didn't know what to do. There was water coming into the boat, much like there was blood coming out of me. Very fast and furious, just like this storm happened. And I know I didn't say, God, do you care if I'm going to die? But they went to Jesus. And I can imagine that conversation with Jesus wasn't like, hey, Jesus, you got a second? We got a little issue here. Can you maybe wake up and give us a little hand on what we're supposed to do? No, what do you think it was? It was, teacher, don't you care? You're sitting here sleeping. We're fighting the storm. We're going to drown, and you're just sitting here taking a nap? What is this, Sabbath? No. They awoke him. And, it doesn't say how he woke up or what he did. But it says he got up, rebuked the wind, and said, "Quiet, be still." Now, if the storm would have eventually quieted down and eventually, petered out and stopped, would they have known who he was or what power he commanded through his faith? No. Immediately, the winds and the waves said, "Yes, sir," and they stopped. And everything was quiet and still. Everything was quiet and still. Now, as I lay there, sat there looking at the blood squirting out of me, I got my phone out because I had my cell phone. I called my boss first. Or actually, no, I'm sorry. I called the ambulance first and said, "Hey, I've just hurt myself. Here's the address. Can you come a little quicker than normal?" They said, "Yeah, we'll send somebody." Then I called my boss and said, "Hey, by the way, I'm probably going to have to go to the hospital. Can you approve the route so my warehouse guys can start working?" Now, this is all like going through my head. At this point, I am calm completely, which is odd that you're, I don't know if it was just lack of oxygen or blood coming out, but I was calm. I was still. And then I called my foreman who was out in the warehouse, because if I wouldn't have called him, no one would have known where I was, because it was a separate bathroom in the office. So he came in and was like, "Oh, wow." So eventually the ambulance gets there, and I'm sitting there holding my head with paper towel. This paramedic comes in, bless his pea picker. I think he was more scared than I was, which you'll see that in this whole story. There was more scared of it. But anyways, so he comes in and says, "Sir, I'm going to have to let you, remove your hand from the bandage," or the towels. I said, "As soon as I do, it's going to squirt out." "Sir, I need you to remove your hand so I can see it." I said, "As soon as I do, it's going to squirt blood everywhere. You probably don't want me to do that." "Sir, I said, "Okay." "Oh my gosh, cover that up." I'm like, "Okay." And then he says, "All right." So he gets his little bandage, puts it on there, and he starts wrapping my head. And I said, "Sir, you're not wrapping that very tight. Would you like me to hold the bandage while you wrap it?" "Sir, I know what I'm doing." "Okay, but I can feel that it's not that tight. There's no compression on the wound." And he argued with me again. And finally I said, "Okay." And at this time, I'm standing up talking to the guy. They bring the gurney up the stairs and say, "Can you get on the gurney? We'll try to get it back down the stairs." I'm like, "I can walk. I don't have a problem walking. I'm standing. I'm talking to you." So they said, "Fine." They held me like I was going to pass out. And I'm like, "I'm okay, but this is loose." So they get me down into the ambulance. They put me on the gurney in the ambulance. And the whole time we're driving to the hospital, I can feel the blood just running down my head because there was no compression on the wound. And I was like, "Well, Lord, if this is it, at least I'm in the ambulance, I guess." So we get to the hospital, and when they cart me back, and they're trying to stitch me up because apparently I had 2 arteries and a vein. So when I do things, I go all the way in. The doctor was going like this and then cussing because he could not get one stitch in. I, on the other hand, was laying there like, "Should you be that nervous, buddy?" I remember specifically, I'm very calm and still at this time. And I forgot that before the ambulance got there, I did call my wife and say, "I'm okay." Which immediately, she was like, "Oh, his voice is too calm," and he opened up with, "I'm okay." So, being married to me, she's heard that many, many times. But, so, she eventually got to the hospital. But while I was at the hospital, I'm sitting there. They finally get me stitched up and not bleeding, but it still looked like I had a gunshot wound to the head. And across the hall, I could see there was a gentleman there that kept looking. He was another, I think his daughter or son or something was in there. He was just sitting in a chair. He kept leaning over and looking like. So, you know me. Hey, buddy, how you doing? He said, I don't know, probably better than you. I said, well, that just depends on how you look at things. He never looked again my direction. So between the paramedic freaking out and the doctor and being nervous, the whole time I was still. And the whole time I knew that whatever would happen, God had it. That God had it. So with the disciples, and they were scared, and teacher, don't you care if we drowned? And he said, quiet, be still to the wind, and it immediately obeyed. Immediately. And then he looks at them. Why are you so afraid? Where is, or do you still have no faith? So remember what they had just saw pretty much most of the day of him healing the sick. There was even a point where the centurion came to him and said, my servant is dying. Can you heal him? He said, let's go. He goes, no. You can just speak and he's going to be healed. And Jesus is like, wow, I haven't seen this much faith in all of Israel. Good job. So they've seen this. They heard this. They've seen all these miracles. And then they get in the boat. And Jesus is like, why do you still have little faith? Why? You've seen all this stuff. You've seen all this. Why? And then they were all terrified. Them and some of the other boats that may have seen all this going on. Who is this? Now, I'm sure Jesus heard that and thought, what have I been doing all day long? Who have I been talking about all day long? Who have I said I was? Who did I compare myself and the kingdom of heaven to? And I've healed, they've seen this. I'm sure he was confused and was like, really? But he also knows he's made us. He knows we're sinful creatures and have, I mean, even if we just had the faith, remember, as a mustard seed we learned a few weeks ago, that we can move mountains. God's not asking for a lot. If we could just have a little faith. They said, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Even the winds and the waves obey him. So, at the hospital, it continues. If I had a good lawyer at the time, I might have talked to him, but... So we're sitting there. I'm okay. They've got me stitched up. Stephanie's in there. I talked a nurse into taking some photographs, which, Lou, you want... No, I'm just kidding. I did talk a nurse into taking some photos. He was like, well, I'll get in trouble. I'm like, that's okay. Just snap some pictures and hand it back to me. So I still have those. That looks like I had a gunshot to my head. But, so they come in there. They unhook the IV. And they kind of start working the discharge and everything else. They wheel me out. I start walking to get another test done, and they go, you're looking a little pale. I said, well, yeah, I guess. Well, then they started noticing that they hadn't turned on the IV. This whole time, they hadn't turned on the IV. So I wasn't getting the fluids that I needed from what I just let go. So they said, well, we're going to put you in another IV and have to put another bag in you before you can leave. I'm like, okay. I'm like, whatever. At this time, I'm like, I'm just happy to be alive and seeing my beautiful wife and walking around. But so they set me down. They filled me up. And then we got to go home. So then I looked like, Scarface for a while with the stitches sticking out. It was great for the youth classes. But in those moments, in that time where everything around me was going crazy and nuts, and people around me were freaking out, I never lost hope or faith. Now, does that happen in every situation I'm in? 0% no. However, it was just something when I was looking at when God commanded the wind and the waves on that boat to be still, and everything was, and still people were still freaking out or being terrified of what they just saw, what they just experienced, who this man was. And I'm sure there was some murmuring about, why did he wait this long? How many of you have said that? God, why are you waiting so long for this? I've prayed for this. I've prayed for this. I've prayed for this. And every time that we're still and we realize who God is and who Jesus is and what he's going to do for us, sometimes it always doesn't work out for what we want. Think of Lazarus. God could have quickly went there and healed him, but he waited because he wanted to show his Father's power, right? He wanted to show just like if the storm would have slowly died out, everyone would have said, well, the wind changed, the storm, blew out. But no, it was an immediate thing because he wanted to show his power. Besides the fact he was tired and wanted to take a break and rest. And y'all think, how in the world did he sleep through a storm that sounded like it was going to capsize the boat? Then you have never tried to keep a child awake on the way home so they will go to sleep in their own bed. It is amazing that they can sleep through just about anything except for when you're trying to do something quietly that you don't want them to know that you're doing. Right? It's like you open that cookie bag, they're like, oh, hey. You're like, how did you hear that? Like we just had the TV on like full blast and there was nothing. But as soon as you hear that, you're like, what? Huh? They do, I don't know. But so Jesus was that exhausted, that tired from his daily work that he slept that hard, that deep before they came. So just as the disciples, when they were fighting and trying to fight the storm themselves and eventually went to Jesus, at that moment that I opened that door and my life immediately changed that day. And I always think about that every time I see a wreck or a car crash on the road. It was like they did not wake up and intend to demolish their car and ruin their day or ruin more of that. But as soon as I did it, I knew who had me. I knew who had me. And there are times in life where I struggle and I'm just like them because I'm a stubborn, sinful man that wants to do it myself and take care of everything myself. But then I need to realize that it's not me that's the provider of my family. It's not me that's the one that goes out and does what I do to bring in stuff to provide for them. It's God. But there are times that I don't. I fight it myself until I think the boat's about to tip. And then all of a sudden God steps in and says, why didn't you ask for me sooner? So I don't know if it's just my personality or whatever, but I think my God is a little sarcastic. He's like, why'd you wait so long, buddy? Why? And at those moments when I finally break down and say, okay, God, I got nothing. The storm is too much. Here's, my boat. You take the wheel, you do what you need to do, and then there's always a peace that comes over. There's always a peace to come over. So from the shoulder, about 5 years later, we had a week where, unfortunately, he had lost his fight recently of 4 or 5 years. But the 1 week, my mother went to the hospital because she was having an infection with her knee, because she had both knees replaced. So she went into the hospital because she was having a lot of pain. They were trying to figure out what. That same week, my father-in-law was diagnosed with cancer as well. So we decided, let's go up for the weekend. You can visit your father on Saturday. We can go to the hospital on Sunday and visit my mom, that she was in the hospital. I talked to her on Friday. They had cleared her for surgery because they were going to go in and repair the knee replacement and fix it. So this is Friday. In the afternoon, she was cleared for surgery. Everything was fine. Everything was good. I was like, great. We'll see you on Sunday. So Saturday, I'm sitting at actually Kathy and Scott's old house with our kids just playing around. Stephanie had went with her mom to go visit her dad. I get a phone call. And I've gotten phone calls from hospitals before because of my mother and her health problems, but none quite as shocking as this one. Because remember, I spoke to her on Friday, right? Saturday afternoon, they called. Hey, are you close to the hospital? About 30 minutes away. Why? Well, your mother just coded. We got her back, but you probably should hurry up and get here. Excuse me? Can you repeat that? You know, because obviously I know what that word meant. So I called Stephanie and said, Stephanie, I'm coming to get you because we're going. And at this moment, we set aside all bygones. I called my brother and said, I'm picking you up. We're heading to the hospital. By the time we got to the hospital, if any of you have ever watched like any medical shows, I know it's an old one like ER or any of the newer ones now, you know when you walk in that door and there's a doctor standing there waiting to meet you? Yeah, and I walked in, and this is not the first time, because one time she was in a coma. I prayed for her before we went to church. And when we came back to visit her that afternoon, this was years before this, there was a bunch of people standing around her gurney. And again, in my mind, I was like, what? Couldn't find out she had woken up and they were moving to someplace else, but there was just a lot of people in that room that didn't know what was going on. So walked in. As soon as the doors opened, a doctor stepped up and said, are you Joey Karr? I said, yeah. He goes, I'm really sorry. And he was very calm and tried to articulate what had just happened, and they had lost her again and could not recover her. Now, at this moment, for whatever reason, there was a calm and peace over me. Now, maybe it was the 15 years I struggled with her health up and down, kind of preparing myself for one day for this, but more than likely it was because God paused it and said, I've got you. And it was so surreal. It was almost like when athletes talk about being in the zone and everything slows way down and they can see everything. So we talked to them and they explained kind of what they thought, and they had no clue what had just happened. She had just started coughing up blood and then coded. But that moment, and I knew that she had just given her life to Christ before that, and a few years or so, I was actually able to baptize her up there. But then I made a phone call to her pastor up there, a great friend of mine, and he said, I'm sorry, Joey, but can I tell you the last thing she said to me the last time we spoke? And I'm like, sure. At this time, calm, cool, collected, yeah. What did she say? She said, Pastor Ron, I want to let you know I really love Jesus and I can't wait to go to heaven. At that moment, I knew that one day I was going to see her again. And there's going to be a great reunion in heaven when I get to see her and my grandmother. But in that moment, and I can't explain how calm and cool that it just seemed that I was able to do what I needed to do to take care of things. But it was because of God. It was because of the fact that before this, I had built a relationship with Jesus. Now, there are times where that relationship is not as good as it should be or could be, and that's on me, because God's always there. We are the ones that choose to go away. We are the ones that choose not to study. We are the ones that choose not to pray. We are the ones that choose to fight the storms on our own. We are those that do that. So we need to understand that no matter what the storm is, whether we are the boat or the church is the boat, and the sea is the storms, or the sea is the people, or the outside people trying to get in, or trying to pull you down, drag you down, knock you out, get you out of this boat, we need to understand who God is. Because they were terrified and asked each other, who is this? That even the winds and the waves obey him. And remember in Psalms 46 it says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." So I just want to leave you with a little bit of who Jesus is, because that's where we have to realize, no matter what we're struggling with, what we're going through, what the outcome may be, whether we like the outcome or not, we have to understand who God is. His credits, this is Jesus, his credits are too long to list. He has too much. He has done the impossible. He hails out of a small manger. He didn't come as this conquering king. He came to live life like us. He is the Lion of Judah. His father, his daddy, is the author of the best-selling book since all of time. Jesus holds the world record fish fry. Just throwing that out there. With a few loaves and fishes, he fed 5,000 men, not including the women and children. He walked on water. He turned water into wine. His likeness, or the likeness of his head, is in pretty much every single church in the world. He is the King of Kings. He is the ruler of the universe, the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. He is the bright and morning star. Some say he's the rose of Sharon. To go along with today, he is the Prince of Peace. May you get to know him better, so that when your storms happen, you don't wait to go wake him up. You talk to him immediately. Let's bow our heads. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, you truly are an amazing God, and there's been so many times in my short, almost boring life compared to others that you have stepped in and were mighty and showed miracles. I pray, Lord, that each of us will turn not only to the Bible, but also to our lives and how you have showed up. That we would have faith in you. That you would guide us and direct us. Lord, I just ask you, increase our faith. Amen.